Oh yeah, there's a party over here. I know you guys, maybe right now you don't belong to a political party. Someday you probably will. Certainly you'll be identifying with one of the political parties and at least voting for somebody in the party because they ain't going away, I'll tell you that much. So you know we can't start talking about any topic without starting on the founding fathers. Certain of them, like Thomas Jefferson, were all about parties. They thought they were essential to democracy, couldn't get anything done without them, so he's a big fan. Washington? Yeah, not such a big fan of the parties. However political parties may now and then answer popular ends, they are likely in the course of time and things to become potent engines by which cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men will be enabled to subvert the power of the people and to usurp for themselves the reins of government, destroying afterwards the very engines which had lifted them to that unjust dominion. So let's have a closer look, shall we? Let's start by figuring out why we have parties. You remember that course organizer from the beginning of the year? Linkage Road there. So parties are supposed to link us to the government and to policy making. They do so by first choosing candidates, running the campaigns for those candidates, and once those candidates are in office, they try to make policy. What if they are not the party in power? Well, they can certainly still then serve a purpose as a watchdog. They can point out the tyranny or the decisions that are maybe unsound from the other party. And they are supposed to, of course, coordinate the policy making. And we would see from the last lecture, we saw the approval rating of Congress being so low that right now Americans would say that they're not doing that function very well. Now, to get more technical and scientific, there is a model and a theory that kind of try to explain why we have parties and why they exist and why they continue to exist. It's a symbiotic relationship, they say, between the parties and the people they serve. The voters want to maximize the chance they have that their policies will get adopted, and in return, parties say, okay, we'll enact those policies as long as you keep electing us to office. And that's the relationship that we kind of expect will continue. If that theory is working properly, we will see that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party will be somewhere in the middle of where people on either side of the political spectrum tend to be. You guys did the testing class where you saw what you kind of identified with in terms of your political ideology. So it'll be somewhere on that spectrum, and you can see just in the middle of the left or liberal is the Democratic Party's mean perception, whereas the Republicans are right in the middle of what would be the right. And if we see those parties veer either way, right or left, they're going to be losing some of the majority of that party, and they're going to be more extreme, and that's not what the people necessarily want, at least not the majority, and so you'll see them losing favor. Parties are organized into a couple different ways. First off, we have the conventions, which their purpose is to choose the people that run for president or office and to write the platforms that will hopefully be supported by those leaders. While those leaders are elected, so in between elections, so to speak, the party runs what are called committees that kind of keep the party running. And of course, the funny thing is now, is there really an inter-election period? We saw that the week after the Democratic and Republican conventions last month, there were folks in Iowa already talking about a caucus for the 2016 election. Good grief. Okay, let's take a step back in time to when you had Mr. Williams or another U.S. history teacher and try to remember some of these different periods of party control in history. We shall be good at the beginning. You guys remember the Federalists and Anti-Federalists. Alexander Hamilton wants to create a national bank. To do so, he needs an alliance. So he gets a bunch of politicians together and forms a party, the Federalist Party. Doesn't last too long, but his opponent, Thomas Jefferson, soon forms one of his own, calls them the Jeffersonian Republicans or Democratic Republicans, popular with the folks in the South because they advocate against this strong central government. This would soon change into just the Democratic Party, led by, of course, Andrew Jackson. It is under President Jackson that the Democrats really gain a lot of power and popularity, not just by the Southerners, but as you can see also by immigrants, settlers in the West, folks that are opposed to the strong elite central government and in support of states' rights. And the architect behind all of this was not Jackson himself, but Martin Van Buren. Interestingly enough, he admitted that, it's good to have an opposing party. Now think about why that is. We'll talk about it in class. But he got his wish. The Whigs, which the word Whig starts out from the Revolution, anybody that opposed tyranny. This gets its start from Northern industrialists and Southern planters, such as Henry Clay, and they really thought that Congress should be stronger than the president. See, President Jackson, his folks liked him, but anyone that wasn't aligned with his policies thought, man, this guy's getting away with a lot. And so they were opposed to tyranny on the other side of the coin. Whoa there, just when you thought you had a two-party system, we got some pretty divisive issues here. Slavery, and particularly the Dred Scott decision, split both the parties. And so as a result, they are fractured, not effective, and you know the rest of the story. You have Abraham Lincoln coming with the Republican Party and winning the presidency. As soon as he does so, we have the states like South Carolina saying, we're out of here. Then you have the Civil War, and of course the Republicans gain control of the country after that. Duh, they won the war, and they hold firm for about 60 years. The Democrats still pretty bitter in the South until the next period begins. 1896, the Republicans nominate McKinley, and the Democrats take a little risk in nominating this guy, William Jennings Bryan. He's kind of on the fringe. He has some crazy ideas. See, he sees the gold standard that was in place in America, wherein every dollar is basically backed by solid gold somewhere. He sees that as benefiting the rich, the in power, and he sees another option, which is to have silver be the backing of the money. The problem is a transitionary period. When you go from gold to silver, economists warn this would cause inflation, which of course if you have the money, the businesses, inflation's a bad thing. But if you're the farmers and the prices will go up for the very things which you are selling, there'll be an opportunity for you to make more money. So the farmers backed William Jennings Bryan. And of course, the Republicans hated this idea so much so that the author of the book, The Wizard of Oz, wrote about it. You see, the way he put it, we have Dorothy following a yellow brick road, which symbolizes the gold standard. She's going to the Emerald City, representing Washington, D.C., only to find that the wizard, who represents McKinley, is powerless. But by clicking on her silver slippers, she finds she can return home. I know you're saying, they were ruby slippers, Mr. Fry. No, they were silver in the original film, but when they made the movie and it was changed to color halfway through, they thought, well, silver's kind of boring, let's change them to red. Of course, the Great Depression and the New Deal changed everything. Lots of folks that were formerly Republicans sided with FDR because, well, frankly, Hoover failed to do anything for the economy. And so you have all those groups there that you see listed that went mostly to the Democratic Party. And oddly enough, if you look today at where those folks are in terms of their party, you'll see not much difference. So following FDR's presidency, the Democrats continued the tradition of trying to make lives of Americans better by creating jobs and otherwise legislating. And we can see this with Harry Truman. His Fair Deal was an attempt to make employment in America more equal. He also expanded public works. And his kind of plan was after people come back from fighting in the war, they should be treated to a fair deal and be able to get the job they need and have a house for their family, etc. This was interrupted a little bit when the Republican Eisenhower won the presidency. You can expect he would win as he was a great war hero. Everyone still remembered from World War II. But quickly the tide turned back to the Democrats when Kennedy was elected. His new frontier was also expanded unemployment benefits so that people that were out of work would still have what they needed. And The Great Society by LBJ took this even further. As we know, he legislated in the way of civil rights legislation, but also expanded the government's role in terms of Medicare and Medicaid. Medicare, we'll talk about later more, but is essentially healthcare for retired peoples in America. And Medicaid is healthcare for folks that are younger and poor and can't afford it on their own, and is usually applied at the state level. Whenever the tide seems to turn either far to the left or far to the right in this country, there is a backlash typically. And this happened with President Nixon at the end of the 60s. After all this Democratic control of the government, President Nixon, Richard Nixon, had a strategy that he was going to get the voters from the South that he thought should actually align more with the Republicans in terms of what they believed. So he got these longtime Democrats from the South to switch parties to the Republican Party, and we still to this day see quite a few of those. This is called realignment, when folks start to change their party preference, and it happens every so often, and it can cause huge shifts, obviously, huge implications in who controls the government. We see then also an era of divided party government, wherein the president is one party and Congress, either one or both houses, is the opposite party, and we see this even right now with President Obama. The implications there are that you're not going to get a lot accomplished, because if you're one party and part of Congress or all of Congress is the opposite party, they're going to make sure that you don't pass legislation. And so that's what we saw as soon as 2010 and the shift from the Congress being in the control of the Democrats to Republicans. Not a lot has gotten done. It wasn't until the 90s with President Clinton that he, a Democrat, also controlled all of government, with the House and the Senate being Democrat. And they were able to do quite a bit during that time, along with the help of a great booming economy from the tech sector, to restore balanced budget to America. And I guess we can't leave out the third parties. They haven't had much influence in this country except for when they split the vote of a major party. But there are three types that we should know. The first one is the single issue. Let's say that you have a person who's really into smoking marijuana, and the Democrats and the Republicans don't support the legalization of marijuana, therefore he can't identify with those parties. He forms his own, the Marijuana Party. We also have splinter parties, which, as you can guess by the name, they split off or splinter off from one of the major parties. And then the last group is, maybe you have some wacky guy that just decides he wants to run for president, and he can't run on a ticket of Republican or Democrat because of whatever factor. So he decides to run on his own. We see this with Ross Perot. He was a wealthy oil guy and had the money, so he figured why not. And he actually got quite a bit of the vote in 1992 and 1996. 19% of the vote, in fact, and most people consider the voters for Ross Perot to be more conservative, and so you could argue that they actually took away or stole votes from the Republican Party, leading to the election of President Clinton. If third parties didn't have much of a chance in the past, it looks like in the future they may have more hope, and wherein we had seen the shift of folks from either the Republican to the Democrat or vice versa in what we called realignment. Now is the era of party de-alignment, and this is evident by the fact that we are down now to only 37.6% of voters declaring themselves Republican and 33.3% declaring themselves Democrat. And that leaves quite a few that are voting but are not a part of a party per se, or not the two major parties. So either a third party or an independent voter.